Hey everybody, Sully man. Leaping from where we left off, we're in objects, and today we're actually going to create objects. But I want to kind of briefly breeze over what we learned so far. Just remember that objects are comprised of paths. Paths are made by more than one anchor point joined together. So what I like to do is I like to group the types of objects, the major types of objects that you can create, which are text. That one's pretty straightforward. Then you have your shape, and then you have your line. And again, they're all comprised of paths. Like with this path right here, just two anchor points, and which creates the line, and then an appearance placed on it, which is a blue stroke. This one here are four paths joined together with a red fill as the appearance. And text is actually a text object with a specific font selected. In this case, it's Myriad Pro with a black fill. So those are the three major groups. And here we're going to be working with this set of tools. This is actually a zoomed in version of this section right here in the tool palette. All these tools right here. Also keep in mind that with these tools, if you notice the icon, when you highlight it, it's a box. So at the bottom right corner of that box, you'll see kind of a little arrow. And if you click and hold, you'll actually see subtools. So for the instance, this pen tool has an add anchor point, delete anchor points, and then convert anchor point, which I'll get into depth later on in other future videos. But this is the main section we're going to be working on to be able to create these three major groups in any combination that we want. And I went ahead and kind of organized them here. So text, really, you're only going to be using the text. And the text has subtools in that section to create text and text on paths and what have you. The three major tool sections for shape are this square, and it has its subtools, the blob brush, and the eraser, which I kind of think of subtools as well, to subtract from shapes, slice shapes, and cut shapes into even more dynamic objects. And then you have line. And these tools right here, which you can see the pen tool here, the line tool here, the brush that creates paths, and the pencil. Those really are indicative of creating lined paths. So let's go ahead and get started creating some of these objects. So let's start with text. It's a pretty straightforward one. And again, this isn't the tools videos. This is creating objects. So we're just going to create some initial objects. I'm not going to go too far in depth. Just kind of giving you the synapse of what they're all about. So the text tool is pretty straightforward. Click on the text tool, click anywhere, type in the text you want. And then you can move it around with your move tool. Use your bounding box to shrink it or stretch it or warp it, however you want to do it. That's text. So I'm going to go ahead and shrink, get these out of the way. Moving on to our, these are pretty much your rudimentary shapes. You've got the rectangle tool, the round rectangle tool, which is just rounded edges. Ellipse tool for circles and ellipses. Polygon tool, and that's for, if you wanted to do an octagon, pentagon, and you can go into triangles, and basically you can remove sides and stuff. It's a pretty cool tool. And star tool does the same thing. For starbursts, actual stars, there's a lot of applications to the star tool. And then your flare tool, which actually mimics the solar flare that you'll get, like if you took a picture or if you're staring up at the sun, and it creates that flare. That's what that is. So let's go ahead and start with the rectangle. With creating a rectangle, you click and drag. And you can see here I can create whatever kind of rectangle I want or try to get a perfect square. I could sit here forever to try to create a perfect square and eyeball it. Or with these tools, you have some options by using the Shift, Alt, and Control buttons. So I'm going to show you the first one, which is Shift. Now if I hold down, if you see if I'm really distorted here, I'm going to go ahead and hold down Shift. And if you notice, it actually snaps it into a perfect square aspect ratio. So as you can see, it's dragging out from the original anchor point. And I can size the square and keep it perfect by holding down Shift. let's go ahead and release Shift. Now I'm going to hold down Alt, and you're going to notice something happens. Keep an eye on the originating point. Now, by holding down Alt, I can expand and stretch this rectangle shape from the original point, centering it. So that's a nice little feature as well. So I just released Alt, and now you can do a combination of Shift and Alt. So if you wanted to keep it a perfect box and stretch it from the center outwards, that's how you do that. So that is the square. Let's move on to the rounded rectangle tool. So same thing, click, drag out. So you can click and drag out, and you've got your nice rounded edges. With this one, you can do Shift as well to keep it perfect and size it. But you can see that the rounded corners keep the dimensions that you set for it. Now moving into the dimensions, with most of these shapes, you can actually click and release. It'll actually bring up a panel, a dialog, where you can actually punch in the dimensions that you would like. So you can set the width, set the height, you can lock it together so that they're always the same, and then set the corner radius. And then hit OK, and it'll actually create that shape that you can place into your artwork. That's one way to do it. Or you can actually do it live by using the Shift, Alt, and Control buttons. And don't forget the up and down. Let's show you how that works. So up and down on the D-pad, if you notice, I'm tapping up or holding up. It'll actually add roundness. And if I hold down on the D-pad, it's going to remove it. So up for the increase, down for the decrease. So decrease brings it to sharp edges, up brings it into round, so you can kind of customize that on the fly. Alt, again, doing the same thing, allows you to expand from the center. Shift allows you to drag out and keep that perfect aspect ratio, and the combination of both allows you to keep it perfect and expand from the original point. So that is the rounded rectangle. Moving on to the ellipse, same thing. You can go ahead and drag out and have it as distorted as you want. You can click and drag out, hold Shift to keep it perfect, and then Shift and Alt to drag out from the center point and keep it perfect. So that's the ellipse tool. I'm going to resize these and get them out of the way for now. Moving on, our polygon tool. Here's the polygon. Works the same way. Holding Shift allows you to drag out. This one already centers itself, so you don't really have to do Alt. But hold Shift will lock it in. And what's also great about Shift is the rotation. When you're actually rotating objects, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But anyways, hold Shift to lock it into its aspect ratio to keep it nice and perfect. And the up and down will actually increase size. And then the down arrow will decrease size. So you can actually go to a triangle if you wanted to. It's about that is as far as you can go with that. And then, yep, if that's the shape you wanted, you size it out the way you want, and you're done. So there's the polygon tool. Star tool works the same way. Click and drag. This isn't looking too much like a star right now. I think it has too many sides, so I'm going to go ahead with my up and down arrows on the D-pad. I'm going to go ahead and decrease with down to create my star. I don't want it kind of floating off. I want it nice and straight, so I'm going to hold Shift, and if you notice, what I was just talking about, it'll actually lock it in perfect, and you can actually rotate in 45-degree increments. You'll be able to do that, but right now I just want it nice and straight. Once I get to the size I like, release, and I'm good to go. There's my star. Okay, lens flare, I'll just give you a quick look at what that does. I'm going to do it onto this shape so you can see what it's actually doing. And what it's doing is mimicking a lens flare. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so you can see that. When I hover it over, you can see all these nice glaring strokes, and there's opacity set to it and all sorts of effects. That I'll show you how to create yourself in later videos, but that's the lens flare tool. And that one works the same way too. You can actually just click to create it. Let's go ahead and click on the tool, and then you can go in and actually play with the settings all you want. That is something I highly suggest. On each one of these tools, go in and just start messing around with them. So let's move on to the blob brush, since it's in that category. Take a quick glance. We went through all the shapes within the square and all its subtools. Now we're moving on to the blob brush. Go ahead and turn that off. So with the blob brush, if you have a Wacom tablet, which I have, you can actually set this with pressure sensitivity, and if you'll notice something, I can scribble and I can make the stroke thinner and then fatter and thinner. I'm actually using my Wacom tablet to do this right now. Scribble that in. And you'll see it kind of auto-corrected itself, but it's one shape. And I'm going to show you something real quick. I'm going to go over to just a regular paintbrush tool. This one's a more line-oriented tool. I'm going to go ahead and it does the same thing. I have pressure sensitivity with my Wacom tablet. But I'm going to show you something. So notice the path. Using the Smart Guide, you can see the path is on the outside. Everything's nice and filled and merged. Whereas this one, you can see the path's in the middle. It actually keeps the path live. So you can actually go in and click on anchor points and tweak the path around. Not to say that you can't here, because you can. But this actually keeps the stroke in contact. So you can actually later on apply brush settings to it. Like this tries to mimic some traditional media. I'll go to the stroke panel and enlarge it so you can see what's going on. So the path is still smooth, but you can see the edges are all jagged and sharp and kind of trying to mimic like a dried out marker or whatever it is, a paintbrush. That's what's cool about you know, nice thin paths like this versus using blobby shapes, and that's why they call it the blob brush. So go ahead and delete that. So that's the blob brush there. Works the same way, but this one you can't click and get a settings dialog box. This one, if you click, you're just getting dots, which are just individual shapes, which I'm going to go ahead and delete. For this one, double click the tool, and then you can go in and actually set the settings. So fidelity actually keeps the anchor points as close to the movement of the mouse or the Wacom tablet. So a higher fidelity is going to help the people that don't have a steady hand. You know, whereas a lower fidelity, you know, it's not going to auto-correct as much. Smoothness, you know, is essentially exactly what you think it is. It's just going to kind of smooth out your paths, not use as many anchor points. So that's what that is. And then you can kind of go in and tweak the brush, the rotation, the angle, size. Again, go in and just start playing with the stuff. That's how you're going to learn, is through practicing and making the errors. I highly suggest make as many errors as you can, because you have the video, you can check back, see how you know, I get things done, and I'll definitely have, you know, break these videos down further to show you some cool brush settings and stuff like that. But for now, just go ahead and mess around and make those mistakes, because you'll definitely learn from them. Okay, so that's the blob brush. And the last of that category, which I'm going to zoom out, so we did the square and all its subtools, the blob brush, and we're moving on to the eraser. With the eraser, there's a couple others, which are the scissor tool and the knife. I'm going to start with the eraser. And the way the eraser works is exactly how you would think. You just kind of drag and erase things. So if you wanted to erase all this portion, it actually does that. It'll alter the path and erase from that object. And now we have two objects that I can move around and do what I want, or color it different from the other thing. So that's the eraser tool. Then you have the scissor tool, and this one actually is based off of more of finding the anchor points, which you can notice with my Smart Guides on. I can hover over the points of this path, and you see it says anchor. So you want to, with the scissor, find the anchor, click it, and then find the one that you want to slice. So if we want to slice this from here, I can then go in and it slices that apart. But also, if you notice, when I'm hovering, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see this, when I hover, you're seeing the magenta path, but you don't see it here, because what it's actually doing, it's slicing the paths, not the object. So it cut the paths, so the paths are still in, you know, they're still there, but you're just not getting the full shape. Whereas with the eraser, if you notice, it's a solid shape. You know, it's its own object, but the shape was actually cut and made. Whereas the scissor doesn't do that; it's actually cutting just the paths. You can join them by I like to use Control J, so it's select the anchor point, hold Shift, select the second anchor point, then hit Control J, and it'll join. Or you can head over to Object, because we're dealing with objects, which I'm going to go ahead and undo that so you can see. So with these paths, we've cut it, we want to join it and make it into an object, a joined object. You select that path, hold down Shift to make a second selection. Select the second one, then head over to the object, because we're dealing with object. Let's head down to this section, because this is dealing with everything that we need to be dealing with, not expanding it or grouping it. we're going to be dealing with the path. We want to join those anchor points, so we join them. And now it's its own shape, and I can change the color, and later on I won't get any errors because the paths weren't joined. Whereas this one, I probably would. So anyways, that's what the scissor does. We'll get into that deeper later on. And then the knife. This one kind of works like the eraser does. It'll create new shapes. This one kind of helps guide you by cutting things. If you notice my line squiggly, but it's trying to help keep things smooth. If you notice I release, I now have two different shapes with the assistance of that knife tool. So those are those major tools for creation within that category of just shapes. Some of the tools are arbitrary, like the blob brush. This knife, and some are they're just kind of user defined. You can be a lot more pinpoint with them. So I'm going to go ahead and shrink this stuff and get it out of the way. Okay, so moving on, let me go ahead and see what category we're on. So we already did text. We ran through all these shape tools here. Whoops, I'm trying to do that right now. And now we are moving on to line. And what's in this category is we have the pen tool and its subtools, the line tool and its subtools, and then I showed you a little bit of this brush tool and the pencil tool. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on each of them. Just on a kind of a brief overview to give you an introduction of how to create objects and where to find the tools to do that. So let's go ahead and start with the pen tool. This one has some mystery behind it, but it's actually a pretty easy tool to use, and it's used in a click-by-click basis. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to go ahead and click down. There's my first anchor point, and then I'm going to click, and there's my second anchor point. And that created a nice line path. So right now it actually has a fill. We can change it to a stroke, remove the fill, and then we can apply a heavier weight to the stroke, 8-point weight. You can also, with the pen tools, click, and then click and hold, and then you can actually bend out and add a bezier, which is essentially a fancy word for curve. Add a curve to your line. You can actually close it, and you're good to go, and you have a nice little arc. So that's the pen tool, and I'll get into that later in full, a lot more detail. Then you have your line tool. So just like the pen tool, line tool, you can create a line. You have a subtool as well as the arc tool, and it's going to do exactly what you think, create an arc. This also has the secondary options. By holding shift, you can lock it into space, and if you move it around, you'll see it snaps into place, but locks it in. You have alt to where it's working from the center point. You can use them both to do the expand from the center and keep it locked in. And also with the up and down, you can add more of an arc to it. So that's down for decrease and up for increase, and that's the arc now with the up and down. So that's the arc tool. And spiral tool, same thing, same options pretty much. Click and drag out. With up and down, you can add more segments to the spiral. So up, adding, down, decreasing, shift, locking in place, and if you see, it's kind of snapping into those 45-degree increments. So that's a pretty handy little thing to know. And then alt, it's going to do the center, so you can do a combination of both. And now you can also do control with this one, and this one actually affects the bend. So I'm going to hold down control. If you notice, it's kind of bending the spiral a little more, and if I go closer in, it's bending out. And so you can hold control, get the bend that you like. Use up and down to add segments if you want to. Shift to lock it in, and alt to kind of spin it around and do what you want with it. So remember the up and down to add segments as you go. Control can change the bend, add more to it. Shift locking it in place for rotation and sizing. And that's the spiral tool. And then I'm not going to spend too much time on these. Go ahead and mess around. It's exactly what you think it is. If you want to create a rectangular grid, you can go ahead and do that using the up and down to add rows and what have you, or click and set it before you even put it down. Same with the polar grid. It's more for spheres and stuff. So that's that. Now we have the brush tool. I did already show you this one. This one's more of an arbitrary tool, so if you got a Wacom tablet or you're using your mouse, you can just kind of click and drag around, and you can create that. I have an appearance using this default Illustrator brush for traditional media. I can actually select that and go back to a basic line. And again, I can change the stroke weight if I wanted to. And that's, again, creating a nice line path that we can apply an appearance to, whereas the blob doesn't. It's creating blobs or shapes that are then objects once you're finished creating it. So pencil tool works in the same way. You can create some stuff with the pencil. Now both of these have some alt options to it. So what you're going to want to do, let's say with the pencil, you're drawing and you got these squiggly lines and you decide you want to go back. You'll see some subtools, and it's a smooth tool. And this smooth tool actually applies for both brush and pencil, along with erase. But I'm going to go ahead and just leave it on the pencil. And I have this stroke active right now, so if you notice, I'm going to hold down Alt, and it changes the icon of the brush, and it actually changes to the smooth tool. So what I can do now is click and then change the bend to it. I can actually smooth it out, show that I want it a little smoother than what it is. By going in and doing that, like this point here, if I wanted to smooth it out, I can go in there and just kind of draw and make it smoother if I wanted to. And that's what it'll do. So you'll notice with these paths, let me go ahead and select this one, do the same thing. You can see all the anchors that this is comprised of. I'm going to go back to my pencil or my paintbrush and then hold down Alt, and it'll put me on the smooth tool. Redraw it, and it'll actually smooth it out really nice and get rid of a lot of these anchor points. So it's a very, very handy tool to have. And those are all your line tools. So all in all, that's the breakdown creating. And I'm going to let's go ahead and turn this layer off. It's creating those major objects, which are text, and you have your shapes, and then your lines. And remember, they're all comprised of paths, and paths are made of more than one anchor point joined together. So these are the tools, so just keep them in mind. It's in this section, in the toolbar. And don't think, you might open up yours and your toolbar looks like this, but this is just an interface thing that, like I showed you before with the double arrows, you can expand these. So, if you wanted to see this larger, you can stretch them out if you wanted to. It's just an interface thing. I like to have as much space as I can, so I tend to mush things in. So if you want to do the same thing, you can do it with this. Click it back and you'll have the same sectioning, but it definitely categorizes, so you can see the horizontal rule in those sections, and it keeps all those line and shape tools together, so you'll know where to find them. So I hope you took something from this. The next thing that we're going to be working on is understanding objects that we've created and their stacking order, and being able to group them together. So again, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.